Good evening from Seoul, and welcome to AJP's closing brief for Friday, July 3rd. One day after the worst crash since the global financial crisis, Northeast Asia snapped back, but the three markets rebounded on three very different engines. And only Korea bought the artificial intelligence trade back. The KOSPI surged nearly 6% to around 8,088, recovering most of Thursday's meta-driven plunge in a single session. Tokyo's Nikkei rose almost 1.5% to around 69,700. Shanghai, still in its final hour of trade, was up around 0.5% near 4,050. Sort the three rebounds by what was actually bought, and the day's structure appears. Korea repurchased the artificial intelligence trade, wholesale chips led everything. Japan bought it selectively, memory rebounded, but the broader bid rotated into names the rally had left behind. China skipped the trade entirely. Its gains came from robotics and gold, while chip names sat still. The common tailwinds, weaker than expected U.S. jobs data, revived hopes of Federal Reserve easing. Brokerages called Thursday's sell-off excessive, and reports that artificial intelligence developer Anthropic is in talks with Samsung on custom chips gave the sector a fresh storyline. The real headline in Seoul is not the index, it is who did the buying. Domestic institutions poured in nearly 4.5 trillion won of net purchases, effectively carrying the entire rebound alone. Foreign investors sold more than 2 trillion won on a day the market rose almost 6%, extending a selling streak now stretching into its 11th session. Retail investors also sold over 2 trillion won into the strength, taking profits after buying Thursday's crash. SK Hynix, which suffered its steepest fall in 17 years on Thursday, rebounded around 11% to roughly 2.43 million, won about $1,600. Samsung Electronics gained around 8% to about 310,000 won, or just over $200, lifted by the Anthropic talks and positioning ahead of its preliminary earnings on July 7th. SK Square, the holding company whose main asset is its Hynix stake, recovered only around 4% to about 1.59 million won, or just over $1,000, regaining barely half of Thursday's loss, a sign foreign heavy names are healing slower. The rally was narrow. The KOSDAQ finished essentially flat, and roughly 300 KOSPI stocks still fell. The won, meanwhile, strengthened sharply, gaining about 16 won to around 1,526 per dollar. Shanghai's rebound is running on entirely different fuel. In late trade, the composite was up around 0.5%, near 4,050, and the leadership was robotics and gold, not semiconductors. Ningbo Tuopu Group, a components maker at the center of the humanoid robot supply chain, hit the daily limit of 10% at around 62 yuan, as robot names became the market's strongest theme. Shandong gold jumped more than 7% to around 26 yuan, riding bullion higher after the weak American payrolls report strengthened the case for Fed easing. The most telling number may be the one that barely moved. Gigadevice Semiconductor announced a strategic partnership with Desay SV on domestic automotive chips, and the stock closed the announcement day essentially flat. With Shanghai's chip equipment names still correcting, mainland investors are rebuilding exposure through robots and safe havens, not through the artificial intelligence chip complex that Seoul spent the day repurchasing. Tokyo split the difference. The Nikkei rose almost 1.5% to around 69,700. And the session's character was rotation money moved toward names the artificial intelligence rally had passed over, while the chip complex itself steadied rather than led. The exception was memory. Kioxia surged more than 9% to around 83,300 yen after a brutal week, mirroring the SK Hynix rebound and confirming that the memory trade, at least, was bought back on both sides of the strait. Fast retailing, the index's heaviest weight and a classic non-tech name, rose nearly 3% to around 84,500 yen, the emblem of the laggard bid. Sony gained around 1.5% to about 3,380 yen. The yen's recent firmness, driven by speculation over possible intervention and by Tokyo inflation data keeping Bank of Japan rate hike expectations alive, kept a lid on the rebound. One day cannot settle the question Thursday raised whether memory demand has peaked. What today showed is who believes what. Korean institutions bought the dip with conviction, mainland investors hedged into robots and gold, and foreign investors kept selling Seoul even as it soared. The tiebreaker arrives Tuesday, when Samsung's preliminary second quarter numbers show whether the fundamentals side with the buyers or the sellers. That is the close for this week. We are back Monday with the next session, and Tuesday brings the Samsung earnings that could decide this market's direction. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching AJP.